Zam, wham, wow. Something only a comic book publisher gets to say. So again, a huge zam, wham, wow to the Boulder Library and JLF Festival. This is fantastic. And for Ruchira Gupta being here with me. And I know, I hope Alan Brooks will be coming in. He had a flat tire. That's something that only happens in comic books, Archie's world, correct? But I'd like to start out with a personal story that how did I get into the world of comic books and how comic books changed my life and how this title, Word, Image, and Text, means so much to me. I married into the Archie comic kingdom. Archie Comics was started 80 years plus ago by my father-in-law that was mentioned, Louis Silberkleit, and he had a son. And then there was another family that started Archie Comics, the Goldwaters, and they had a son. Well, when the fathers passed on, each of those sons brought Archie Comics into second generation. And at that time, they were in second generation. Archie Comics had hit India. India became one of our hugest fans. It was always U.S., India, and Canada, and then later on the Philippines. But Archie exploded globally. And my dear late husband, Michael Silberkleit, and his partner, Richard Goldwater, brought it into second generation around the globe. It was amazing. And those two gentlemen had passed away 19 years ago, 7 months apart from one another. Archie Comics was running rudderless. And as I said, I married into the kingdom. And I was a school teacher in Paramus, New Jersey. I love saying that when I'm in India because people still know it, but I'm sure you've all heard of it here in Colorado. But I was faced with a situation where there were a lot of sharks circling me that wanted my stock, and I didn't want to sell. I always say, do librarians and teachers go into their careers to think about becoming wealthy? No. I was unmovable. I had 25 years under my belt as an art educator. So what did I do? I stepped out of the classroom and into the Archie boardroom. Family businesses are tough, but the biggest problem was, I hate to say this in a library, I had never read an Archie Comics. I had no love of reading for entertainment. I hope the head librarian did not hear that. But I had to start bringing home those comic books and reading them. I was piling up the ones very quickly that had impactful messages, piling up ones that made me laugh, piling up ones that I wanted to reread. I could never figure out why people collect their comic books and want to keep them. But there were so many stories I wanted to be sure I could pull out again and read and get that chuckle or impactful message. And then, out of the blue, I was 54 years of age. I go to the library because I want to read the Da Vinci Code. I had been at many cocktail parties where I hated them because I always felt left out. People were always talking about the books they read, and I could never engage in the conversation because I hadn't read the book. Nothing could get me to pick up a book. But now, all of a sudden, I want to read the Da Vinci Code. I read it, I think, in 3 nights. I stayed up till like 3 in the morning, and then I started getting more books. Well, drop the mic and yell out. It was all because of those comic books that helped me find the love of reading. And I went back thinking, when would those comic books have been perfect for me? Because we, as a co-CEO, I know we have 80-year-old people reading our books. We have 8-year-olds. So it was around 7 or 8. And I remember exactly where I was. I was stepping up. I was going into 2nd grade. I remember my dress. It even had a color like that on the top, and the bottom was gray. I was going into 2nd grade, and when we got to the school, I saw a banner, grade 2. I was ready to bound out of my mother's hand, and she tugged me back. And she said, "You're not going there. You're going there. You're going to grade 1. You're repeating first grade. You have been left back because you cannot read." And that was it. She told me she did not know. My mother passed away about 3 years ago and constantly told me she didn't know how to tell me. She thought I was smart, but I was dumb, stupid. My mother did not know much about, not using those words. And there I went off for another year of second grade. I remember another year of first grade. I remember my teacher, Mrs. Charmer, pointing to those words. They looked like that up there. I should have told you, Mr. Sanjay, wrap them in a speech bubble. Put some color on them. I could not read those words. That's how they looked. I couldn't get it. And I would also twist the remedial work and put it in my handbag to hide my shame. My late husband never knew I was retained. I was embarrassed. I was ashamed of it. But once I found the love of reading, and all through a comic book, Archie Comics, I go around with a megaphone telling people it's not you being stupid or dumb. It's the people out there, and telling the people out there, everyone learns differently. And you've got to pull out everything out of your toolbox to see what will click. The comic book certainly would click for me because I grew up to be an art teacher. So comic books are not like regular books. Open one and get whisked into the Marvel universe, the DC universe, or straight to Riverdale. And if anyone wants to know, that TV show was a license from Archie Comics, Riverdale. It was fabulous. It seemed dark, but I can tell you more about that later. But now I want to hear your personal story, and there'll be lots of time to ask us questions. Okay, so thank you.
So as a little girl, I did grow up on Archie Comics in Calcutta. There's a fantastic street like Fifth Avenue called Park Street in Calcutta, and there were booksellers who would display these comics on the sidewalks. And the big treat was to go on Sunday and buy one comic and then come back and relish it for the whole week. And I did collect Archie Comics. I knew Veronica and Betty and all, Jughead, and, identified with different traits they had. And also I understood the power of storytelling, which was so nice. There was a whole universe which was there. And there I was in a house full of books, but this was fun storytelling. This had color and it was glossy and all of that. So it was very attractive to a child. Then later, as I left journalism to become an activist against sex trafficking, and this was also, came from the impulse of storytelling, my activism, because as I grew up, I began to see that life around me was unfair. Calcutta has a lot of inequality, a lot of poverty, and I wanted to do something about it. And I thought, okay, I'll do it by telling stories. I'll expose what is unfair. So I became a journalist first. As a journalist, I was hiking through the hills of Nepal when I came across rows of villages with missing girls. And I thought, where are the girls? I asked the men drinking tea, playing cards, and some were hostile, but a few answered. And they said, don't you know, they all are in Mumbai. Now, Mumbai was 1,400 kilometers away from these remote Himalayan hamlets. And I was puzzled, and of course I had to find the answer. And I found, to my horror, I followed the trail, ended up in Mumbai in the brothels. It was right in the heart of Bombay, between Bombay Central and Grant Road Station, and I saw little girls in cages. And I was shocked. In my lifetime, in my generation, in my country, something like this existed. I couldn't believe it. So, of course, I had to do something. As a storyteller, the first response as a journalist was, tell the story. I made a documentary called The Selling of Innocence, and I won an Emmy for Outstanding Investigative Journalism for it. And then I'm on stage in New York at the Broadway Marquis Hotel, and everyone was applauding, and there were bright lights. And all I could see were the eyes of the women who had told me their stories. risking their own lives because they wanted a different future for their daughters. So in that instance, on stage, I decided I'm going to use my Emmy and my documentary not to build a career in journalism, but to make a difference. So I stepped off the stage and I turned to the lady who'd given me the award. That time she was the US Secretary for Health. Her name was Donna Shalala. And I said, just giving me an award is not enough. You've got to do more. And she said, what do you want? I said, I want to change the laws. I want the world to become a fairer place. And I was 20-something, but she took me seriously. She listened. And she introduced me to people in the US Senate, Congress, the White House. It was the Clinton White House, the UN. And I showed my documentary at the UN and advocated for a law which would punish the buyers and the traffickers and help the girls and women who were being preyed upon. I did the same with the help of the White House and showed the documentary at the US Senate and actually contributed to the passage of what is now known as the Trafficking Victim Protection Act, and in the UN Protocol to End Trafficking in Persons. So that happened very quickly. And at the same time, I thought, this is not enough. I have to go back to the women who told me their stories. So I went back to Mumbai, and I sat on a straw mat with the women, and I said that, listen, I won the award, I've broken the silence, I've told your story. And they said, it's not enough. You have to do more. And I said, what can I do? I'm just a journalist. I'm not a doctor, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not even a social worker. And they said, well, you know English and you have access to money and networks. I said, that I do. And so they said, you can help us get our children to school. And that's how I started my NGO. We opened a community classroom and hired a teacher and began educating children in the red light areas to get to school. And slowly, across India, we opened more community classrooms and began to get the children into school. We had, the principal would object sometimes other parents would object, but I began to organize the women also to go as a group and fight for their own rights while they were fighting for their children's rights. And fast forward now, I've helped more than 20,000 women linked to livelihoods outside of prostitution, which is not based on their body invasion, and helped more than 1,400 children not just finish school, because there's still a continuing program, but finish college. And, we are still carrying on, and turned red light areas into non-red light areas. So we were thrilled with our successes, and, I kept advising the UN. I kept going to different countries to create better laws and policies for women and children. But always my core was to be a storyteller. So I continued with my writing, and I wrote a young adults novel to talk to the next generation of potential activists or maybe potential victims about sex trafficking, which is now the second largest organized crime in the world, preying on kids who are between 9 and 13 years old. So I wrote this novel called I Kick and I Fly, which is published by Scholastic, about a 14-year-old girl who is being groomed, and she is from an indigenous tribe, and she was being groomed to be sold into the sex trade when a women's rights advocate enrolls her into a Kung Fu program. And through the practice of Kung Fu, she not only learned to fight for her body, but to fight this organized crime ring, which began in India and ended in Queens, New York. And that book, I've been doing the rounds with that. But also at the same time, I realized that to get to younger people, I have to give them different ways of being able to connect, understand, because these are big, tough topics. And just after a horrendous rape on a bus of a young woman in Delhi, me and a man called Ram Devineni, we decided that we would start producing comics to reach young people, to teach them about what can happen to a girl if she is, her body is violated. Because a lot of young men were being taught a different kind of masculinity, which was based on domination and violence. And same thing, girls were not being taught how to say no. So we said, we'll bring out comics. And we created a superhero called Priya. And she's a rape survivor. She rides a tiger. And she goes around all over the world, flying in the sky, helping girls and women who might be victimized by sexual violence. And we produced 5 such comics. They are freely available online. Priya and the Lost Girls is about sex trafficking. Priya and the Wolves is about the whole COVID crisis. And Priya Shakti is about the rape crisis. Priya's Mirror is about acid attacks on girls. And so we continue using all kinds of language and medium and mixing up word, image, and text. And then I thought, the world is also being given a message of fear right now. We are being told that, the world is going to hell in a basket. There's the climate crisis, then there's the shortage of food, then there is, inequality, there is toxic masculinity, the end of democracy, our countries are falling apart, foreigners are coming and invading our countries, the foreigners are coming, all kinds of fear which are not based on anything. And that fear is making us make decisions which are also based on fear, rather than thinking rationally. So I thought, actually the world around us doesn't have to be so fearful. There's a lot going on in this world which is good and hopeful, and nature shows us that, right? And during COVID, I was stuck in my parents' garden for 5 months, which is in a home which is like 150 years old. And I discovered, old school brushes and an old drawing book from my school days, which was empty. And I had nothing to do. It was monsoon. It was raining, pouring with rain. And I thought, I'm going to paint hope. I have a paint book. And after 50 years, I picked up, just like you said, you began reading. I began painting and drawing at the age of 50. And, I started making these illuminated manuscripts, as I call them. And these are just paintings of my Forbesganj garden. Just like, I'm going to say it, it's not like to be boastful. But like, Monet kept painting Giverny, right? It was a small garden. And he found life and beauty in that. And the same way I found life all around me in the middle of the disease of COVID, the hunger, everything was falling apart. And I saw that, no, monsoon is making life come back. And so I began painting this, and I'll just read you a little paragraph that I've written in the book, and I call it an illuminated manuscript because I've written little text along it, almost like haiku along with each of the paintings. I began to paint after 50 years. I wanted to capture the sense of reawakening. I felt the magic of life in defiance of disease, death, socially unnecessary suffering, and callous governments. My drawing book became a way of holding on to family, to place, and to life itself. I share these paintings now with the conviction that there is a garden still on earth. For all of us, I paint hope. So now, back to you.
Well, looking at word, image, text, as I said, comic books are not like other books. There's 2 types of literacy in the comic book. It's the image. And imagery is powerful. It's lasting. There's been plenty of studies done on how it increases memory. I strongly believe that every academic subject should be opened up with a comic book. And you'd be amazed how many comic books are out there that you can pull that can fit into your whatever academic you're teaching. But even if it doesn't, say the comic books like Archie Comics, I had a professor, not my professor, but a professor at MIT say that he demands that his students read comic books because he says it relaxes the brain. It helps them to expand their critical thinking because that's what happens reading between the lines, reading between the images. The story is given to us in comic books. There is a beginning, a middle, and an end, and the characters are taken through, the crisis or whatever to the climax. But the reader becomes part of the writer because those images get them to think, utilizes their values, internalizes those values and ideas, and expands the story. And that's what makes things stick. that's what makes one to want to go further and maybe turn the page and read more, find out more. And as that professor says, it relaxes the brain to want their students to take in more of what may seem difficult, hard, or not that interesting. So the beauty of pictures does a lot. Would you like to say something about that?
Yeah, and what I found was that, sometimes words can become theoretical and inaccessible because words have consequences, and they can almost feel like an assault to young people who are going through a lot of mental health crisis right now. And I found with comics and with visuals, I could reach them. So for example, the Priya comics, 500,000 subscribers. I never thought that would happen, but it did happen. And again, with these paintings, they've been exhibited all over the world, in the Hagia Sophia, in the Gandhi Museum, and of course the India International Center in Delhi, for those of you who are from India. And people have felt a sense of belonging when they came. And what I could not convey through words was conveyed through the images, because the images are something that creep into our subconscious. And that is why art is so necessary for all of us, because sometimes we have to escape the manufactured thinking which is being imposed on us. And Gloria Steinem wrote the preface of this painting book, and I just want to read something because she writes so beautifully to all of you from that. The harmony of the garden seeds the endurance, hope, and activism that our complex world asks from us. It manifests the healing and love that is vital to our natural and bountiful world. The garden paintings remind me that flowers, trees, and people all grow up towards the sun. Our natural world reproduces itself from the bottom up, not from the top down. Social justice movements are also evidence that true and lasting change always grows from the bottom up. This lesson has stayed with me and grew in clarity through a lifetime of writing, thinking, and social activism. Ruchira's paintings connect us to this powerful vision. Her work invites each of us to find our own garden. It reminds us that what is perishable will be reincarnated again. We have only to listen to the murmur of the wind, touch the truth of the rain, and be reminded of the cycle of life. In diverse faith traditions, the garden is the image of harmony, of balance, of relationship, and so of paradise. Across cultures, a common vision of a world of beauty and freedom persists. Beautiful. That's glory.
And here is a character, Scarlet Saltee, that represents the autistic population and was inspired by where I taught. There was an autistic center. And I remember this little boy that came to us nonverbal in diapers when he was even, I think he was at 6 or 5 and just totally nonverbal. And at grade 4, he came to me and said, "I do not think they're being nice to me." And I was so proud that he could express that. And just looking at the children in the center, I always felt how they seem so isolated and they want to have friends. And I decided to create this character, Scarlet Saltee, that represents how people who think autistically want friendship. They want to be included. It's just their social cues are not like the norm. And wanting people to be patient, kind, include everyone, no matter what their social cues are, and to understand that person, the autistic person, doesn't have to change. It's me, society, that has to learn more about autism and be aware of a person's likes and dislikes and how I can appropriately make them feel included. So that's a project that I have been working on at Archie Comics for a long time. You will not find Archie in our comic books, purposely because I don't know if you would read her story. And she's not about making money. She's about getting her message out. So I try to do as much publicity as I can on Scarlet so people will contact me and get her stories on a PDF through PayPal. And that way I get to talk to them and I get to talk about the Scarlet mission, about just what I shared with you. It's about understanding autism and making sure you always acknowledge the person in the room who's off in a corner, who thinks they don't want to be part of that noisy group, but to make them feel welcome.
It's so beautiful that, to have the courage to actually get into the world of Archie and create a character who can speak to issues that we haven't talked about so far takes a lot of courage. And I'm glad that Archie is also doing it because I never thought it would happen. And which again gives me hope because, we always think that how are we going to navigate this, blur the boundaries between real issues and fun topics and blur the boundaries between the topic here, word, image, text. And this is what graphic novels, illuminated manuscripts have taught us that we can do it. And there are so many other boundaries which are being blurred even as I speak, right? About sexuality, gender, and other things. And the more fluid that we can become, I think our mind can absorb much more. And I see this more and more as I deal with young people because they're much more honest in their instinctive responses. But I think what I would like to do, Nancy, is maybe take a few questions from
Yes, that's what I was thinking. And it's hard to see the people out there. I don't know if we could bring up the lights in the audience.
Yes, it would be nice to see the people in the audience. But if anyone has a question, just stand up. I think it might be easier because we may not see your hands. Oh, we can now. Yes.
I have two questions. One is on the...
Please use the microphone. We're recording.
I have two questions. One is on the Nepal trade, and if you can just, the trafficking, just give us a little insight into how that network worked and who were the people involved and so on. That's number one. Number two, it's to both of you. Tell us a little bit about the economics, the business aspect of selling your comics and the challenges and the successes, etc.
Okay, so, when I asked the question, I didn't know the answer would change my life to the men who were sitting under trees, playing cards and drinking tea. I asked them, where are the girls? And when they said that, don't you know they are in Mumbai, I began to look around me. I went into villages to see, how did they get to Mumbai? And I met farmers who were poor, starving, illiterate, isolated. And I asked them, I said, where's your daughter? And they said that, a man came to us and he offered $50 or $100. And he said, I'll take your daughter to the big city. We'll get her a job. She'll send some money back home. Or we'll get her married and, she'll be off your hands. And you'll get a tin roof over your head. Your roof is leaking. Your child is crying. You have 5 kids. 4 will eat. 1 will go away. Let her go. And the farmers were so sort of innocent that they let their daughters go. And who were these people who came to the farmers? They were local village procurers. So there was someone the farmer knew slightly. It could be a grocery store owner, a truck driver, someone from the neighboring village, and a taxi driver, etc. And they would come and offer this money. Put the girls on trucks and buses and take them to the border of India and Nepal. And there were corrupt border guards, and they would take a little bit of money from these transporters. Wink, wink, nod, nod, the girls were taken across the border. On the other side of the border were shabby lodges run by these lodge keepers, and they would take these girls and lock them up for 2 or 3 days, even 5 days, beat them, starve them, subjugate them till they were willing to do anything, and then hand them over to another set of transporters who would put them on trains and buses and take them to the big cities of Mumbai, Calcutta, Delhi. And there were pimps who would negotiate the price of these girls depending on their beauty. Now, by beauty, what do I mean? Fair skin was at a premium. Being voluptuous was at a premium. The younger, the better. The youngest I've met is a 7-year-old. And then these girls were handed over by this pimp to the brothel managers, who would lock them up in tiny rooms for 5 years, 10 years, if they lasted out that long. And behind the brothel managers were the landlords, the financiers, the organized criminal networks. And of course, behind all of that were the sex buyers who wanted fresh meat, very young girls, and they would offer money for this. And so the traffickers saw a profit in it, and they would find enough poor girls across India and Nepal to source. And this is how the whole trade operates. So there's the petty criminal, and then there's the whole chain, taking it all the way to organized crime. And in terms of commercial value of the work we do, so the novels I get paid for, like Scholastic will give me an advance and they publish it and they distribute it. For the comics, we got grants from the New York Cultural Foundation and places like that, and we made it freely available because we thought there's a need for it. This book, there are only 200 copies available in the whole wide world because it's self-published. And I published it in a small town near this village, and the small town is called Siliguri, near Darjeeling, where the tea grows. So, there's no commercial value for it, but I think it has an intangible value, which is much deeper.
But Mr. Brooks just stepped into the house. Zam, wham, wow.
Hello.
Welcome.
Hello. My apologies to everyone for being late. It was unavoidable. You guys are wonderful. Thank you. I can see you have everybody really engaged. It's beautiful.
Yeah, Archie Andrews can sympathize with you. Happens all the time in his red jalopy.
Last night I watched the Indian Archie's movie.
Oh, yeah, did
you see it? Yeah, I watched it. It's on Netflix last night. It was such an interesting adaptation from just to see how it was adapted to the culture and everything there. I know we're doing our Q&A part now. Is that right?
We thought we'd just begin with the audience.
Oh, okay. Well, you guys are great. So I noticed that this panel is called Words, Image, Text, which spells out WIT. Have you guys noticed that, W-I-T? And I was like, with these panelists, it's guaranteed that it's going to be WIT. I know we're coming towards the end. One of the things I wanted to ask, though, is I noticed that there's a lot of innovation, particularly like you're doing like the enhanced comics, and you are doing things specifically with changing sort of the formula of Archie Comics, including talking about autistic characters and stuff like that. I don't know if you guys have covered anything.
Well, I just mentioned that, and I thought since we talk about comics, we should mention your comic book because you sent that to me. It's fabulous. So can you please just talk about what inspired you? Because again, it's graphic literacy. Anything you want to talk about and you want people to listen to you, wrap it in a speech bubble and get graphics going. So tell them what your project was.
It's a really interesting... so there's a comic in particular that I got death threats over, which I feel like is an endorsement, like
badge of honor.
Yeah, like they obviously believe in the power of what I'm doing, but otherwise they wouldn't try to stop me from doing it. But so I write a weekly comic for the Colorado Sun newspaper, where we deal with social issues every week. And then I wrote one called Anguish Garden, which is an allegory for leading white supremacist movements. And my goal in writing it was actually to equip young people with the tools to recognize when they're being sort of indoctrinated or radicalized. But of course, I have to make an entertaining story, right? Like, otherwise I might as well just be writing a manifesto. There's this thing that Rod Serling, who knows the original Twilight Zone? Everybody, yeah. Okay, so Rod Serling created the original Twilight Zone. The reason he created the show is because he got censored for years. He would write about like Emmett Till, who was lynched, and he would get censored. He would write about war, sexism, and he was not even a fan of sci-fi or fantasy. But then he thought, well, if I hide my things in sci-fi and fantasy, I won't get censored. So that's the whole inception of the Twilight Zone, was for him to do social commentary. And so his quote is roughly, when I wrote about Democrats and Republicans, I got censored. But when I wrote about Martians, I didn't, Yes, yeah. And I see like these elements of when you take something and put it in a story, people are able to deal with it in a much more sort of palatable way, even if it challenges them. It's a way to sort of get things to people's souls. So that's something that's always on my mind when I'm creating my own comics, and I see it present in the work you guys are doing too.
Well, can you talk about how your latest comic, how you're getting that published? Because there's many ways to get comic books published.
Okay, so I gave a TED talk where, and I was talking about me being a insurance agent, which obviously when you looked at me, you were like, this guy, insurance agent, right? But when I moved out of that, I could not find a publisher. I was with literary agents for a while and could not find a publisher. And I just determined that I was going to do a Kickstarter and hire an artist and work on my own books. And off of the strength of that, I've been able to make a living without professional publishing. It also allows me to talk about some of these more volatile things. So the most recent thing I did was a children's comic for the Denver Art Museum, but really for my niece. She's 9 years old. And I asked her if she would model, like she would be like the model for kids her age. And she was like, are you gonna put me in it? So she's in it, you know. But, you know, the thing that I found is that once because basically if I was waiting on people to choose me, I would still be selling insurance. So I found that I've made contacts, like I print overseas to be able to afford things. I work with artists in different countries. I work with artists here as well, got a Colorado artist. But just believing sort of that it's possible. You know, there's this principle of like a dedicated 1,000 fans. It's not my idea, you can look it up, but basically if you have 1,000 people who will buy at least 3 or 4 things from you a year, then you can make a living. And that's basically what I do. And things have been able to expand, and you know, I feel very fortunate that people feel engaged and inspired by some of the work I do. But yeah, a lot of it has just been like me pushing forward and trying. I don't know if I'm answering your question.
But how do people find your Kickstarter? I'm always confused what you have to put in there. Is there a certain name or?
Oh, these are good questions. Okay, so Kickstarter is a big hustle. Yeah, right. You're a great moderator, by the way.
Zam, wham, wow.
Okay, so Kickstarter, people think you just start the account and then people, you know, money flows in. But no, it's a real hustle. Like, I inbox everybody on my Facebook, and they cut me off at like 100 messages a day. So, which is not something everybody would know, but I'm just like, hey, I'm doing this. I send out press releases. I'm generally able to get at least some local press on it. And based on that, generally I can kind of hit my goal. But the great thing about the Kickstarter model is, let's say you want to print 1,000 books, and you get maybe 300 people to back you to make the money that you need in order to print them. So once you get the books, you give the 300 people their books, then you have 700 books that are paid for that you can sell. So, so even if I gave them away, it wouldn't be like a financial loss, you know. And so that's a really great thing, and particularly as an independent artist in comics, being able to have people help me print these books who either believe in what I'm doing or believe in me or engage with the story. It allows me to not only sell those books, but also use that money to make the next book. Yeah.
And at Archie Comics, we have schedules. And it all started again in 1941. My father-in-law and his partner, John Goldwater, they saw that comic book stores were just for, you know, boys, men. There was nothing there for girls. So they said, gosh, if we put out a comic book with fashion and romance, we're going to get all the female population coming in. But they didn't realize it would become popular for everybody. It's timeless, it's ageless, and it's genderless. There's also a formula to Archie Comics that all of our artists and writers follow. It's put a bunch of kids into a high school with a little bit of chaos, without any adult intervention, and let the kids figure it out. And that formula has been going on for decades and decades. So we throw out, our schedule. Okay, what month are we in now? Let's see, October. So we're already working on our Christmas. We probably started working on it in August. The stories we want for Veronica, we may have a pool full of writers and graphic artists that just do well with Veronica. So we'll send the idea to them. But it starts, with the editor. It's like a conductor. Every once in a while, I'll have an idea. I happen to be passionate about, and I was very impressed, there was no plastic here. Thank you, there was glass. I wanted to get out messages one year and, up the environment. I don't want any teacher talking about environment. I want them saying, here's a comic book story. Let's discuss it. So I heard Rwanda was the first country to get rid of plastic bags. So I went to Rwanda. I gathered information. I came back to one of our writers who I knew loved just doing, these Archie type stories, and I gave him the information. And he came up with Getting Drastic with Plastic. And that was put into Archie Funhouse Digest, I think number 26. You can't buy it now. You can find it on eBay, or you can get it from me for free by emailing me. And I created a teacher study guide to give teachers more confidence about you should be using comic books at every subject in every class. It'll be amazing. Those kids will be running to your class because you will be the coolest educators out there. And I'm sure you're doing that because you're teaching. You can share now with us what you're teaching and where you're teaching.
So I've taught graphic novel writing in the master's program of two universities, Regis University here in Denver, and then Wilkes University in Pennsylvania. And then there's Pop Culture Classroom, which did some workshops here this week. I art direct for them. They're an educational nonprofit that creates free educational comic books that any teacher can download. They come with teaching guides, stuff like that. So that's a really great resource. It's such an interesting thing to see that shift. Because, when I was growing up in the 80s, teachers were openly disdainful towards me for reading comics, And so to see them embraced as an educational tool in this last 15 or 20 years has been remarkable. If you had told 10-year-old me that was possible, I wouldn't have believed it,
And I'd like to say, I don't think it would be teachers. It was who was over them, the head of the school, the superintendent, and who was over the superintendent? Parents. We have to educate our adults still today that comic books is very serious reading, more serious than just, opening up our novels. A lot more has to happen with the critical thinking to be able to handle reading a comic book. You can't go by the number of pages. It's the skills and exercise that the comic book commands.
Yeah, so there's some studies actually that for struggling readers, the difficulty that they have is being able to make the connection between the words in a sentence, like to join it all together. Comic books sort of help that because they can get some of the context visually. And with each of the panels in comics, you have to basically, in your mind, figure out what happened between panel 1 and panel 2. So that sort of builds up the muscle for stronger reading. So it's a really cool and interesting thing. This is a geek deep dive, so I don't know how many of you know this, but you'll be able to talk to the deep geeks. But in the 1950s in America, and we're down to our last few minutes, so I'll make sure I say it quickly. But in the 1950s in America, there was a psychiatrist who wrote a book called Seduction of the Innocent, which said that comic books were causing children to be deviant and homosexual. And so it caused this craze, right? Parents started burning comic books in the street. Comic book publishers had to testify before Congress. And so me growing up in the 80s as a comic book fan, that was sort of the legacy of that period. And that's why specifically in America, comic books were thought of as a juvenile pursuit, whereas in other countries they were not. And there was so the comics publishers created this self-censorship board called the Comics Code Authority that lasted from then.
My husband was a president. His father
really?
had been a president.
See, yeah, Comics Code Authority. It lasted until 2001. And basically it was like, you know, so this idea that a bad guy does a crime and superheroes punch them and then put them to jail, like the reason that comic books were sort of stuck in that in this country was because of that that code. And so it's beautiful in these days to see, particularly American comics, open up and not be confined by that stuff in the same way.
Yeah, I also was thinking about graphic novels, you know, and if you think about Persepolis, which is written by an Iranian woman who lives in France, Marjan Satrapi, about, you know, how she had to flee her country and come live in France. And it's interesting because she tells a very, very tough story in a very witty way. And, you know, graphic novels can also do that. The other thing I realized using comics as a tool for my activism was that, you know, sometimes the people that I'm dealing with, they may not be able to read long sentences. You know, the pages begin to look very dense, just alphabet after alphabet, and the visuals just help, as you said, you know, to open up the imagination a little bit, which then make the words go in deeper. So that's also the power of comics. But I wanted to ask the audience if they have any questions, because we only were able to have one question.
Okay, so we have 5 minutes, so I would say the idea is figure out your question, distill it down to one sentence, and then ask it, so we can get maybe a couple. So who has a question? Oh, we've answered them all. We did a great job. Question.
Okay, then you can have the last word.
You guys are so good.
Someone there
Okay.
has a question.
There's a microphone there for you.
Yes, I did. In fact, when I was making my film, I was inside the brothels and I'd gone in without telling anyone in the police or anything. And a man came into the room while I was interviewing the women, and he pulled out a knife at my throat. And he said, "I won't let you film here." And I was lucky because the women surrounded me and told the man that if you want to kill her, you've got to kill us first, because we've decided to tell our story. And they saved my life. And also subsequently, all the time, you know, people will show up in my offices of my NGO, you know, steal our things, attack us. A staff member has been stabbed. I get trolled by the sex industry people all the time with horrible images, pornographic images, really. So yeah, I face that on a daily basis.
And this is, you know, here in the United States, it's all over. I was in Highlands, North Carolina about a month ago, and I was in a restaurant. I go into the bathroom, and as I'm in there, there's a sign on the door about trafficking. If you know, it was giving you all the signs and who you can call if you're in trouble. And I don't know how many people here have been to India, and it's just not India where they get these young girls from, but India, you know, you go past the poverty, it's very easy to, you know, get someone. They're living in mud huts and really just horrible. I mean, the word horrible, deplored does not describe this. And we know that there's hunger and poverty going on. So without food and, you know, a proper place, it's easy to get these girls, and the wrong way to make an income, just despicable.
And you know, right here in Boulder, I don't know if you know, but this Colorado is a big hub for traffickers. And, you know, there are so many intersecting inequalities that traffickers prey upon. In India, it is a girl who's poor, who's female, who's a teenager, and she's from an oppressed caste or tribe. In America, she's poor, female, teenager, she's either black or Native American, and she could be from a broken foster care system. And so, you know, all these intersecting inequalities make her easy prey for the traffickers. And, you know, there's something called the Minnesota pipeline in America, for example, because there are sex buyers who will come to New York thinking the Big Apple is a great place to buy girls. The apple means like bite into it or something. And they want blonde and blue-eyed girls. So there's also those that they prey upon, which is part of the Minnesota pipeline. And I call all these girls the last girl, because to me, she's the most vulnerable of all human beings, and she exists in every country. Today, the United Nations says that the crime of human trafficking is the second largest organized crime in the world. It's crossed the drug trade. The drugs trade is, you can consume a drug once, but girls are consumed again and again, generating billions of dollars across the world. And literally, no country in the world is cut off from it, though South Asia is the epicenter still.
Well, everyone, it looks like we have about 2 minutes left. Thank you guys for being with us. I apologize for being late. Can we please give a round of applause to our guests?
And we have Archie Books at the table, and I know you have your book, and your book, I Kick and I Fly. I found it in this, it's like used to be a one-room schoolhouse. It's a very small library. It was there in Vermont, and I've seen it all over, so we're happy to sign books.